Hello, and welcome back to my video series showcasing the upcoming features of MNT 2.0, a Europa Universalis mod. I'm Demian Sky. Today, we'll be looking at wealth in the economy and the new system that MNT 2.0 brings to the table. There have been a lot of changes which fundamentally alter the way the game plays out, so just hang in there while I give an explanation. In vanilla EU4, the player is almost like a god king in that nothing in your country really changes at a provincial level unless you, the player, intentionally expresses it. It's assumed that everyone is kind of waiting around for your divine click, as is evidenced by the fact that you had to click up development individually with your mana points. You had to individually build every single building. It's kind of like everyone that was living there was just kind of waiting around for you to do something. But now, in 2.0, your economy grows on its own because people want to improve their livelihoods, right? And they want to improve their wealth. And so in each province, you have a local AI which is accumulating ducats, kind of like your country accumulates ducats. And then when they make enough ducats, they will actually spend those to gradually increase the province and whatever happens to be there. And the nature of that province actually determines what they tend to build. So if a province is a city, right, with lots and lots of urban pop, they'll use their piles of ducats to generally produce urban buildings. If it's a trading city, like Venice, they'll use their ducats to make trade buildings for the most part. If it's a manufacturing country, like Flanders, and most of the wealth is in creating urban goods, then they'll likely try to improve their workshops and warehouses and things like that. Now, to achieve this, we've basically made a system of fluid ducats. And previously in Europa Universalis, your ducats either existed in your treasury, right, or as debt in the case of loans. But now there are ducats many places, right? Like I showed you before, there's ducats existing in the local fluid wealth pool, right? This represents the money that people have on hand that they can use to construct things or to do whatever. And you also have ducats wound up in the various types of infrastructure you have in your country, right? So, sure, France happens to have 9 ducats in their treasury at this given moment, but if you were to look at the entire GDP of France and the entire value of the infrastructure of France, you would have tens and tens of thousands of ducats all throughout the country. But you as the government can only tap into so much of it. And because France tends to be decentralized and feudalistic, as you can see by the various autonomy scores, France, the crown of France, that is only capable of tapping into a small percentage of the private economy that exists throughout the country. In fact, the autonomy scores you see here, the ducats that are lost due to the negative local tax modifier, those ducats don't just disappear into a vortex anymore. What they actually do is they go back to the estates who happens to be controlling the province. So, for instance, if we go to our estates, we can see that here this province is controlled by the lesser nobles. It has an autonomy of 38.4%. So most of the tax income coming from the peasantry is going to the crown in this case, but the percentage that's left over, the 38.4, that ends up going to the treasury of the lesser nobles. And so you can see here the lesser nobles have an annual income, right? And then they also have a treasury as well, and they can use those ducats for whatever they want, right? The estates now are forces who can act on their own accord and in their own interests. And different estates have different interests, right? The bourgeoisie, they want to right, build out their cities and want to promote trade. The lesser nobles want to improve their farm estates. And the greater nobles want to expand their power. You can see in France, the greater nobles have a tremendous amount of power because France is still a highly feudalistic society. And so now, for instance, when you, let's say you were to present a magnificent gift to the greater nobles, you can see that the ducats that you spend on that gift don't just disappear now, the 311 ducats. Instead, that gift goes into the treasury of the greater nobles to improve their loyalty. That money doesn't just disappear. And likewise, if you were to seize the property of greater nobles, or you were to demand assistance for them, or you were to, right, request that they help you in a war, and you requested that they send soldiers, they would have to spend money from their treasury on those soldiers. And of course, if they decide to revolt against you and raise an army against you, they're also using their treasury to do that against, you know, whatever resources you have to bring to bear. So to put it simply, the amount of money that's in your treasury and the amount of money that's coming into your treasury is a tiny, tiny fraction of the actual amount of wealth and economic output that your country is producing, right? And the more control you gain as a government, the more you can tap into that wealth. But the downside is that whenever you take money out of the private economy, that's not wealth that's being reinvested by the locals into that economy. So if you had every single one of your provinces at, 0% autonomy instead of high autonomy, you would basically be taking that money away from local individuals. And if you end up pissing it away on some unproductive war, it would have been better just to leave it with the locals because they would have improved the economy. And so this really changes the way that that many players will play the game, because it used to be that you always wanted to get autonomy down, 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 because high autonomy was always just wasted money. But this opens up different play styles now, because if you do want to play a decentralized state who gives lots of powers to the estates, then instead of just taxing the crap out of them and using that money however you want, you can instead be in good with the nobles and try to work through them toward your ends, to kind of corral them to and do what you want. And so autonomy is a very different mechanism due to this fact now that you're not just throwing away ducats. It makes large empires in which you have a lot of highly autonomous provinces much more plausible than before. Anyway, I think I went into estates way more than was strictly necessary. I'll have another video devoted to them all on its own. Suffice to say that estates will behave dramatically different than they do in either the current build of M&T or Europa Universalis 4 Vanilla. Okay, so I thought we'd bounce over to Anatolia so that I could give a quick demonstration of what the wealth system looks like when it involves warfare. And so, remember all those piles of ducats which are sitting in every province, right? Well, those ducats can actually be stolen in warfare. It's if an army marches in and they occupy the province, then they can take some of the wealth that's locked up in the infrastructure, and then they can take even more of the wealth that's in the fluid wealth pool. And so we can see here I was called into a war to help Georgia against Armenia and their allies. Normally I would be reluctant, as most players would be, to get involved in an allies war, because why fight for an ally? Well, as it turns out, I can actually get loot when I fight in an allies war. And so you can see the war just started. I have to pick a loot option. I can heavily restrict looting, which will make my troops more disciplined and better at fighting, because if they're running off just trying to get loot, they're not going to be as organized. but it'll make them less enthusiastic to siege, and war exhaustion will be worse because I'm not taking as much from the land. Or you can strongly encourage looting, and your troops fight pretty crappy because they're all just kind of every man for himself, grab whatever's in sight. But you get more loot, right? Or I could just let them kind of loot freely, which is typically the rule in war in this era, and that's what I'm going to pick for now. First, I'm going to let Georgia probably take on the first battle, so I can swoop in. Yeah, I don't care. Go away. Okay. And I've got to recruit a few more soldiers, too. Yes, go away. Find some favorable terrain. Let's head up into the mountains, why not? Uh-oh. That's not my province, whatever. Okay, so once they siege down this province, what happens is a little script fires, and then part of the province wealth is then looted. You can see province was looted recently. Haven't put in a localization for it. But I can actually check my loot pool. And it was, a crappy province, so we didn't get much. But our armies were able to siege 5.7 ducats from that province. And right now it's with the army, so it's weighing them down. So if you loot too much too fast, then it actually hurts troop performance. And so gradually what happens is the loot has to make it home, from your armies to your capital before it can be utilized, and it won't be weighing down the soldiers. So I'm going to go ahead and find a juicier target. We'll go after the Armenian capital, although I'm a little worried about where the army is going. Just sit there, Georgia, why don't you? Do I help or do I just go siege? Alright, let's just help them win this fight. We can get back to looting. Get some mercenaries to speed things along. I want to make sure I'm able to siege here. I should be able to one medieval castle. Sometimes cities will build their own fortifications, which can make it... I don't have enough? Is there a fort? I guess not. While I'm waiting, I'm going to go ahead and loot a few other areas. Ooh, there's an unguarded city down there. That might be where we have to go next. So now you see we occupied another province. So now there's extra loot. That's how much we've seized so far, and you can see some of it's made it back home. Since we're mainly just raiding farmlands, we're not really making much money, but we should get a nice little boost from this city here. I'm going to pass up the capital of Armenia because it's too heavily defended. Now, also, it's important to keep in mind that you'll notice some of the population is being destroyed as we occupy these provinces. And so looting is not without cost. So if I was planning on annexing these provinces, I'd probably want to be doing as little damage as possible, because whenever you loot, whenever you do damage, that has a lasting effect. So we'll see right here. Maybe we'll see it happen. So we have, basically we killed off 2 rural pop, and it looks like we more or less decimated the city for the most part. Because you'll notice that the country that we're fighting is not the same religion as us, which means we feel less guilty about killing off the population and looting their cities. And so that's basically why it was so damaging. If we'd been fighting other members of the faith, it wouldn't have hurt them as badly. So after thoroughly looting that province, let's see our loot pool now. Right, you see we got a nice big chunk of loot. So let's keep at it. Since this has been a pretty successful war, we may even turn a bit of a profit from it. Anytime you fight a really successful war against a bigger foe, then it's much easier to make a profit off of loot in warfare. Whereas when you're fighting a big foe as a big country, it's kind of like, even if you do well in the war, it usually costs you. Oops. No, don't go there. What are we looting here? It should be somewhat valuable. There's a fort there, but it's not really much there for the taking. So to wrap this up, I'm going to go ahead and make a separate piece. I'm going to demand ducats. This will be a war of profit. So send my demand, whatever. So the war is over. So now we got to figure out what we're going to do with the spoils. And we don't have the proper tooltips yet, but this is still a work in progress. So you can see that throughout the duration of the war, we managed to seize 304 ducats in total. However, obviously, one of the reasons that a lot of soldiers are enthusiastic about going off to war is that they get to bring home some of the loot, right? So this is just the pool that everyone is pulling from. And so the state, right, the crown, will take some of that money, and you get to decide. And you can see that if you only take 1/10, the rest of that money goes to the troops. And of course, the more you demand, the more penalties you get, because the troops feel gypped, they feel ripped off. Eventually, I'll be adding other penalties too, to estates, and even to stability. You could lose stability if you seriously gyp your troops. And so, if I pick this option, most of the money goes to the troops, and then they bring it home and ultimately invest it into the economy, right? So if I take 30 ducats, then that leaves 270 ducats to go back home. And a lot of that, a lot of these soldiers are living on farms, and so it can even go back home and help to improve the farming efficiency. And so I'm going to be a douche and take as much as I can. And that was added to my treasury. Now, some of you may have noticed that while I was fighting the war, while I was just playing the game, it didn't look that much more complicated than EU4 vanilla, right, or previous builds of M&T. The population overhaul adds tons and tons and tons of new richness to the game without necessarily burdening you with that much more complexity, right? The underlying system itself is adapting to your actions without you having to make a billion tiny little clicks of, oh, kill population here, steal there, loot stuff here. Instead, the game adapts around your big decisions, right? And so you declare your war as usual, you occupy this province and that province, and the imprint you make on the lands is based off of those big kind of general decisions that you make. If you recall, I said that M&T 2.0 will be much more like you being a king making big decisions rather than, you behaving like an army of ministers making a billion tiny decisions, right? So in my war, I made kind of big strategic decisions, and that big strategic decision ended up having a lot of many smaller different results, you know, in damaging population and damaging wealth. And, you know, those little effects that my war had on this area will end up having far-reaching consequences. It'll take time for that population to rebound. It'll take time for that wealth to rebound. And, you know, if Armenia is subject to more wars, or a famine comes on the heels of that previous war because now the provinces are damaged, it could end up becoming a backwater for the rest of the game. And so my war wouldn't just cause a province to change hands or something of that nature. It could permanently cause the land itself to take on a different nature than it did historically, or it would otherwise. So anyway, that is the third video. I haven't decided what exactly to move on to for the next video, but I'm thinking that we'll take a closer look at the things which can hurt and damage populations' wealth and the well-being of countries long term. Like, for instance, you can see here something called province trauma. And the more abuse that a province takes over time due to war, famine, and plague, the more into a ditch it ends up being dug, and the harder it is for populations to rebound. And it's at these points that the actual land itself begins to lose some of its arability and some of its farming efficiency. And that's how, for instance, someplace like Mesopotamia can end up becoming, you know, a completely worthless piece of land, even though historically it was amazing. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll see you guys next time, and let me know what you think of the video. Thanks.